Okay.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so, well, thank you very much to everyone who still had the energy to join us. I'm Daniel, and I'm presenting on the behalf of the University of Applied Sciences in Salzburg, the FH, with my colleagues Roman Egger and Larissa Neuburger. And we are presenting a very interesting topic about virtual reality. As the title already suggests, it's about virtual reality as a travel substitution tool during COVID-19. And I wanted to start off with a small graph here. And what might sound complicated at first, as the description says on the bottom, it's actually very simple. So I don't want to read it out for you, it's long. It simply says it's the peak amount of players who are playing simultaneously a VR game through the months. And what we can see here is that it's been a steady increase, especially in the first half of 2022. In March, we had a significantly rise in the amount of players who are playing on the Steam platform. And I just want to show you that there have been many opinions and even in pop culture that said that VR is dead. But in fact, based on the research and in communities, the VR community is not dead at all. It's steadily rising. And this trend is slowly but steadily going onwards to a very important stage where we are right now, because as it is the stage today, we still cannot really travel. And this is maybe where virtual reality comes in as an immersive technology, because it has the capability of maybe making the impossible possible. You could potentially travel again. And this is very important because we want to travel. The wish to travel still remains. People want to escape the boredom of their everyday life. And this is where we tried to focus our research in. So what did we do? We connected 3 different dots. The first dot was health crisis in tourism, because we wanted to look especially into the COVID-19 situation. And furthermore, we were looking at the travel risk perception, because we figured it might also have an influence on whether people might perceive VR as a proper tool to substitute tourism. And the final point that we actually discussed, unsurprisingly, was virtual reality. And just to give you a small throwback, at the time when we did the study, we already had 19 million cases and over 700,000 deaths, with over 35 million jobs at risk just alone in the tourism industry, which was already immense. And even though the predictions have shown that this would be an upward trend and we could travel by now, in fact, it has not shown positively, and we're still not able to travel. The second part is about risk perception. We're talking about perceived risk meaning the subjective perception whether traveling is risky right now during the COVID-19 virus, and perceived severity, which is more or less the personal feeling or the personal fear, I'd rather say, to be infected and maybe have potential very negative outcomes due to the virus if you catch it. So those were 2 parts we were also taking into our study to measure whether it has an effect on VR as a travel substitute. And the final and unsurprising part was virtual reality. And we were looking into virtual reality in the tourism industry, obviously. And I think you might have known this already before and heard it probably 1,000 times. Virtual reality has many, many different applications. It could be used for education, for accessibility for disabled people. It could be used for entertainment, for information, or even destination planning. But there's one thing that still is a bit of gapping in the research community. Can it actually be a substitute to travel? And this has been researched before, but that was 20 years ago, in the year 2000, and many things have changed. The resolution has almost tripled, the latency was reduced slowly and steadily, the devices have become wireless, there were more degrees of freedom that you can move around in the virtual environment. There were more devices which were used to capture the virtual environment. You could have more interactive environments, so many, many things have changed. And this opens the question, well, has also something changed in the view of the people? Do they actually perceive virtual reality as a substitution tool during maybe crisis and even just generally as a tool to travel when they cannot travel in reality. So these were our three parts. And what did we do actually? So we put them all together in a technology acceptance model. And we extended it by, as I mentioned before, perceived risk and perceived severity. We also added the component presence because we figured presence is also a very important fact, meaning the feeling of actually being in the virtual environment that has an impact on whether people might perceive virtual reality actually as useful as a travel substitute. We based 6 hypotheses off of the literature and analyzed them with SPSS before we put it into our SEM model to finally test our hypothesis. And what did we actually do in the questionnaire? We had a self-administered online questionnaire in where we have tried to find as many people as possible on many different social media platforms, ranging from Reddit to Steam to Instagram, Facebook, and many more. And when we finally came up with our final sample, we had 192 valid responses. And the whole process went the following. People were actually required to have a VR headset at home. It was a prerequisite. And they had to watch a 360-degree video, which is not stereoscopic, which means it's not in 3D vision, which was filmed by a 360-degree camera, lasting 2.5 minutes, showing most famous places around the world to immerse themselves in this virtual traveling environment. And after the exposure, the participants were led further to answer all of our questions, which were 44, that we Likert scaled in order to be properly viable for our analysis. And when it comes to the final analysis, well, just real quick, you can here quickly see how the SEM model was put together. On the right-hand side, here we can see the base components of the technology acceptance model. I won't go too deep in those because it's taking probably too long, but I will come to them later when I explain our results. And on the left-hand side, we have the 3 additional variables that we included: perceived severity, perceived risk, and presence. So what actually came out? I tried to make it as easy as possible because probably it's going to be difficult to listen to much academic stuff. So the first finding, which was surprising actually, was that risk perception did not influence perceived usefulness. What does this mean? It means that even though if people found that it's risky to travel during the Covid-19 situation, it did not have an influence whether people viewed VR as a useful tool to substitute travel or not. And the second finding, probably the most important finding, was that if people actually found VR as a useful tool to substitute travel, they intended to use it actually for this purpose, to substitute travel. And they also intended to recommend it to friends and also even to use it after the COVID-19 virus ended. So this study even goes beyond just in times of crisis. It's explained that people would also use VR just to travel naturally, even if they could actually travel, which is very interesting. The third finding, also an unsurprising finding, is that the easier that people found the system to use, meaning the easier they could handle the VR headset, well, the more useful they found it to be as a travel substitute, which only made sense because all of our participants obviously had the knowledge to operate the device, because I couldn't actually be there in a laboratory setting to supervise them and to explain them how the device works. But this is also a good part in this sense because it's a very natural environment for them. This is how they actually would travel when they would travel through VR. So in their used homes, on their chairs, maybe just relax, having a cup of tea or coffee, whatever, which is also a very good finding for us in this meeting. And the fourth finding, which is also very interesting and probably explanatory, is that presence, meaning if people found themselves to be actually really, really immersed in this virtual environment, they also felt like the virtual reality has the capabilities to substitute travel. So those were the findings. But what do they mean generally? We have to look beyond that. And we all know that traveling, or generally tourism industry, is a very volatile industry. and it can be disrupted through many ways: terrorism, economic crisis, or just as we have it right now, a health crisis. And this is nothing that has to be something that's critical for the industry. However, it's just a new way to travel, and people must adapt to these new styles. And now it's very important for the managerial part, for the DMOs, to add economic value to this. And how do they do that? Well, it's a very two-sided coin, because on the one hand, DMOs or managers could create very immersive virtual environments where people would feel like they would travel through their VR headsets. But on the other side, they also have to make it in a way that it creates the wish to travel again. So you have to gap this border, you have to cross this line in order to make sophisticated VR environments. On the other side, create this feeling of wanderlust to travel again. And this was, in fact, a result of our study as well. After the VR exposure, people had the urge to travel again, which is very helpful for managers in this sense, because it gives them a reason, okay, yes, VR actually has the capability to be used in a marketerial segment. And this is basically something I want also you to think about. Can VR actually replace tourism? And this is something that I was questioning myself a lot lately. I was critically reflecting on what we researched on. And yes, it can actually substitute travel in the meaning of this study. But tourism consists of much more than sightseeing, to cite John Eric. It's more about also, not only, but also about the culture, the people, the social interaction, the habits, anything that is in the realm of a specific country. And one has to ask themselves the question, well, can VR really create those feelings that you get when you travel to a different country? And this has a lot to do with presence. And I think this is also a very important research topic for the further researchers that are interested in this topic to check out whether presence, and if presence is very high, if it has a higher impact on being viewed as a travel substitute. And so what I want to say is we also have to look beyond just our generalizable results. It's also more about how real can VR get. And that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Daniel, for your presentation.
Thank you.
It's very interesting. So before my questions, any questions from the floor to Daniel and